Imagine waking up to cops marching through your vineyard, called there by your own HOA president. What if one woman with a clipboard and a grudge could threaten to destroy your family's entire livelihood? That's exactly what happened to me in Solstice Valley. The sun was barely up, mist still hugging the vines, when I saw flashing lights and heard boots crunching through the leaves. And there she was, Karen-in-Chief herself, Delilah Hartwell, standing smug with her phone out like she was filming her personal victory parade. She thought she just caught me red-handed. Truth is, she just picked the wrong fight. See, my name's Marcus Thornfield. 3 years ago, I was a high-dollar corporate lawyer in San Francisco. $400 an hour. Designer suits, fancy lunches, the whole package. Then my marriage blew up. My ex ran off with my law partner, and the divorce settlement drained me quicker than a broken faucet. Only thing I had left was my grandfather's 40-acre vineyard. So I packed it all up, moved into the creaky farmhouse, and started over. And let me tell ya, after years of office politics and backstabbing, waking up to dew on the grape leaves felt like therapy. Except, vineyards ain't cheap to run. The fencing was ancient. Irrigation barely held together with duct tape. Tractors older than disco. But it was my family's legacy, and I wasn't about to let it die. That's when Delilah showed up. Think Karen with a law degree and a God complex. Former city council member, until the voters got sick of her nonsense. Now, she pours all that energy into running the HOA at Solstice Heights. This cookie-cutter development that sprouted up like a rash next to my vines. Her husband, Preston, is a developer, slimeball type. Builds those beige McMansions that all look copy-pasted. Together, power couple from hell. The trouble started over a fence. Literally. I was out there digging post holes, sweat dripping down my back, when I heard her car door slam like a gunshot. She came stomping over in heels, clipboard clutched like a weapon. That fencing violates our HOA guidelines, she barked. I leaned on my shovel. Ma'am, this vineyard's been here since 1962. Your HOA showed up 3 years ago. She huffed, muttered something about standards, then marched back to her Escalade. 2 days later, boom, certified letter. Cease and desist. Threatening $500 a day in fines. And she didn't just send it to me. She CC'd the county inspector, the bank, even the local newspaper. That's when I knew this wasn't about a fence. This was war. Lucky for me, I wasn't just some farmer clueless about zoning laws. 15 years as a corporate real estate attorney, yeah. I knew exactly what she was trying to pull. And I also knew something she didn't. My grandfather's deed included agricultural exemptions, ironclad protections. These HOA clowns couldn't touch. So I called an old buddy, Jake Morrison, environmental lawyer with a sharp tongue and a soft spot for farmers. He laughed when I told him what Delilah was up to. Marcus, sounds like somebody just poked a sleeping bear. He was right. Delilah thought I'd roll over. Instead, I started digging. Old deeds, historic filings, dusty folders labeled important, keep forever, and oh man, what I found was better than buried treasure. So there I am, sitting in my kitchen, surrounded by piles of dusty paperwork that smelled like an attic mixed with old coffee. And right there in a yellowed manila folder, I found the golden ticket, my grandfather's original 1962 deed. Tucked inside was language about perpetual farming rights, That's legalese for any HOA nonsense can go kick rocks. Delilah had no idea. She thought she could bury me under paperwork and intimidation. What she didn't know, I'd spent years in corporate law burying other people. My old mentor used to say, when someone sends you a shovel of dirt, you send back a dump truck. So I drafted a letter polite, but sharp enough to cut glass. Attached copies of the deed. Agricultural exemptions. The whole package. Sent it not only to the county, but also the same newspaper editor Delilah had looped in. I wanted the world to see how weak her case really was. 2 days later, I'm out checking irrigation lines when a county inspector rolls up. Guy's name's Rodriguez. He looks apologetic, clipboard in hand, like he hates being there. Anonymous tip about unpermitted buildings. He says, scribbling notes. Anonymous tip. Huh, yeah. I could smell Delilah's expensive perfume in those words. He spent 3 hours combing through barns, sheds, even my old root cellar. At the end, he shook his head and said, Mr. Thornfield, your exemption's ironclad. Whoever filed this complaint doesn't understand zoning law. Translation. Delilah's plan was dead on arrival. But she wasn't done. A week later, the HOA called an emergency board meeting. Agenda community beautification standards and agricultural eyesores. Subtle. Right. So I showed up. The Solstice Heights Community Center smelled like stale coffee and carpet cleaner. About 30 homeowners sat there, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Delilah strutted in front, flanked by board members nodding like bobbleheads. She launched into a PowerPoint about property values, neighborhood character, all that buzzword nonsense. Then, she unveiled her masterpiece, a petition against me. Photos of delivery trucks, wedding parties at the Vineyard, tour buses, all normal parts of my business. But she framed it like I was running some bootleg speakeasy, threatening suburban civilization. And then, Sweet Justice 3, longtime Valley resident, stood up. Mrs. Patterson, retired teacher, spine straight as steel, pointed at Delilah and said, Marcus's Vineyard is what makes this valley special. Without it, this place is just cookie-cutter houses. I swear, for one glorious moment, Delilah's perfect mask cracked. Her smile twitched. Her eyes flickered with panic. Then she quickly wrapped things up, saying they'd review further. But as the meeting broke, I spotted her whispering with some slick guy in a suit carrying a briefcase worth more than my truck. Legal firepower. That's when I knew this wasn't about fences or aesthetics. This was a land grab. See. Later that night, digging into property records, I connected the dots. Her husband Preston, he'd been quietly buying up agricultural land all over the valley. Developers like him buy at $8,000 an acre. Rezone it, residential. Then flip for $50,000 an acre. My vineyard alone could be worth $2 million in his pocket. Suddenly, it all made sense. The harassment, the complaints, the smear tactics. It wasn't random. They wanted my land. And if I didn't fight back, I'd end up another farmer steamrolled into selling. That's when I decided, if Delilah wanted war, then war's exactly what she was gonna get. Delilah must have realized her legal tricks weren't landing. So she switched gears. If she couldn't beat me in the courthouse, she was gonna try and destroy me in the court of public opinion. Within days, she launched a Facebook group called Concerned neighbors of Solstice Valley. And oh boy, she painted me like some kind of agricultural terrorist. She posted pictures of my old tractor, angled just right to look like a rusty death machine. She snapped shots of delivery trucks, calling them a threat to neighborhood safety. She even claimed the smell of my grape compost was bringing disease-carrying flies. Total lies. But you know how it goes. Online, one dramatic post spreads faster than truth ever could. Pretty soon, neighbors who used to wave suddenly pretended not to see me. Bill from the hardware store guy I'd talked baseball with for years turned cold as ice. Even my farmer's market booth, people walked past like I was contagious. The real gut punch came at the bank. Janet, the loan officer who'd handled my grandfather's accounts forever, suddenly started reviewing every request. Smiles fake as a plastic Christmas tree, asking for extra documents, glancing at her screen like I was some red flag risk. That's when I knew Delilah's poison was working. But see, being a lawyer has its perks. I know how to sniff out the why behind the harassment. So that night, I dug into public records. And sure enough, the truth hit me like bad whiskey. Preston Hartwell, Delilah's husband, owned 3 finished developments, 2 more in planning. And he'd been buying farmland like a shark circling bait. The math was ugly. $8,000 an acre if it stayed farmland. $50,000 an acre if rezoned residential. My 40 acres. That's a $2 million payday if they forced me out. Classic playbook. I'd seen it in San Jose, in Sacramento, even in Connecticut. Developers using HOA boards as attack dogs to push farmers off their land. They thought I was just another easy mark. So I called up Jake, my environmental lawyer buddy, told him what I found. He didn't even sound surprised. Marcus, you're not dealing with a neighbor spat. You're staring down a textbook land grab. I wasn't about to roll over. So I hired a surveyor, something I should have done years ago. When the results came back, I actually laughed out loud in my kitchen. Turns out, my property line extended 50 feet farther east than I thought, straight into the backyards of 3 HOA houses. Even better, my grandfather had kept the underlying land rights, meaning those houses were basically sitting on borrowed dirt. And tucked away in century-old records. A utility easement running through the whole valley. Roads, water, power legally protected, meaning no HOA or developer could box me in. Delilah thought she was tightening a noose. In reality, she was tying her own. But she wasn't smart enough to back down. Next thing I know, she's holding a community safety meeting, accusing my vineyard of causing drunk driving and fire hazards. She even brought petitions half the signatures written in the same handwriting. Like a third-grader faked them. That's when it hit me. She wasn't confident. She was desperate. And desperate people, they make mistakes. And when you're fighting a lawyer with nothing left to lose, mistakes are fatal. Delilah's little petitions and Facebook gossip weren't working fast enough. So she pulled out the nuclear option lawyers. One foggy morning, I opened my mailbox, and there it was, a thick, glossy envelope with letterhead fancier than a wedding invitation. Inside, a cease and desist from Hartwell, Morrison and Associates. No relation to my buddy Jake. They demanded I shut down all business operations within 72 hours, or face a lawsuit for creating a public nuisance. The letter was 12 pages long, packed with legal mumbo-jumbo noise violations, traffic hazards, Unauthorized commercial activity. It read like a novel, an entirely fictional one. Now, if I were just a farmer, I might have panicked. That's what they were counting on. But I'd spent 15 years writing and ripping apart letters exactly like this. I knew intimidation when I saw it. Problem was, I didn't exactly have deep pockets anymore. Divorce left me counting pennies. And fighting in court costs more than most people realize. $400 an hour for an attorney adds up fast. One drawn-out case and I could lose the vineyard anyway. So I did what any broke but determined ex-lawyer would do. I hit the courthouse archives myself, armed with a flashlight, gas station coffee, and more stubbornness than common sense. I spent hours digging through dusty filing cabinets older than me. And then, jackpot. Buried in a misfiled folder from 1987 was something that changed everything. Solstice Valley had been designated a historic agricultural district. That meant any development in a 2-mile radius needed state environmental impact studies. And guess who never filed a single one? Yep, Preston Hartwell. My hands actually shook holding those papers. This wasn't just sloppy paperwork. This was full-on fraud. Every house in Solstice Heights, every single McMansion was built without proper permits. We weren't talking about a few zoning violations. We were talking about a $20 million scam. Families thought they'd bought dream homes, when in reality, they were sitting in unpermitted, illegal developments. And Delilah, all her harassment, all her noise about fences and trucks, it wasn't about property values at all. It was about keeping me quiet before I found this. Suddenly, the script flipped. I wasn't just the target of HOA bullying anymore. I was the witness who could blow open the Hartwell's entire empire. That night, I sat on my porch, barrel curled at my feet, glass of wine in hand. The sunset over the vines felt different, sharper, sweeter. I'd spent months reacting to their attacks, always on defense. But now I had the ammo. Tomorrow, I wasn't playing defense anymore. Tomorrow, it was time to go on the attack. Delilah must have sensed I was slipping out of her grip. 'Cause, right after I found those misfiled documents, things went from petty to downright criminal. First, my irrigation line got sliced clean through bolt cutters. Precise. No accident. Thousands of gallons wasted. Vines drowning. A week's worth of work and money gone overnight. Then came the phone calls. Brides and grooms booked at my vineyard suddenly got anonymous tips saying the venue was unsafe, contaminated with chemicals. 3 weddings canceled just like that. 15 grand poof. And if that wasn't enough, fake reviews started popping up everywhere. Yelp, Google, Facebook, you name it. Wine taste is like vinegar. Bride's family ended up in the hospital. One even claimed my vineyard gave them food poisoning. Absolute garbage. But it spread faster than wildfire in July. That's when I knew Delilah wasn't just playing HOA president anymore. She was running a smear campaign straight out of a political hit job. Problem for her, I wasn't alone anymore. See, by then, I'd pulled together a little team. Jake, my lawyer buddy, had filed for a temporary restraining order against HOA harassment, an 18-page masterpiece basically telling Delilah to sit down and shut up. Then, I brought in Dr. Sarah Bennett, a soil scientist from the state university. She ran environmental tests on Preston's developments. And, oh boy, The results were damning contaminated groundwater, erosion, disrupted wildlife, stuff that could take a decade to fix. And then there was Father Miguel, a local priest and community organizer. His sermons about false prophets who build on stolen land hit like fire and brimstone. People started whispering. Neighbors who once avoided me were now questioning what the Hartwells were hiding. The cherry on top. My surveyor's report, remember that, turns out 3 HOA homes were sitting on my land, thanks to easements my grandfather granted. Which meant, technically, those families were trespassing every time they watered their lawns. The power balance was shifting, and Delilah could feel it. But instead of backing off, she doubled down. Dead fish dumped at my gate. Anonymous letters with threats scrawled in red ink. Even cops showing up for wellness checks after bogus reports that I'd threatened neighbors. Each stunt more desperate than the last. What she didn't realize, every single incident was being recorded. Security cameras, phone logs, police reports. Piece by piece, I was building a case that showed a clear pattern of harassment, intimidation, and fraud. And while Delilah thought she was tightening the noose, all she was really doing was weaving the rope I was going to hang her empire with. See, in my corporate law days, we had a saying, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Delilah, she'd brought gossip and bolt cutters. Me, I had federal law, environmental science, and about 100 pages of evidence. And the next step was to spring the trap. Delilah and Preston thought they could bleed me dry with harassment. But the more desperate they got, the sloppier their moves became. And sloppy mistakes, that's when the fun begins. One morning, I was at the courthouse again, digging through old records, when Ethel, the clerk who'd been there since the Nixon years, pulled me aside. Honey, she whispered, you keep looking at the same stack of files. What exactly are you hunting? I explained the historic agricultural designation I'd uncovered. Her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. She disappeared into the back, shuffled through mountains of paper, and came back with a folder so dusty it looked like it survived a war. This got misfiled back in '87, she said, sliding it toward me. Inside was the smoking gun, not just a heritage designation, but ironclad environmental protections. Any development within 2 miles of heritage vineyards required state-level environmental impact studies. And Preston, he hadn't filed a single one, which meant every home in Solstice Heights was built illegally, with full knowledge of the law. That wasn't negligence. That was fraud. I sat there in the courthouse basement, paper spread across the table, my hands shaking from equal parts caffeine and pure adrenaline. Preston hadn't just harassed me. He'd conned hundreds of families out of millions of dollars. His empire wasn't just shady, it was criminal. And suddenly, everything clicked. The smear campaigns, the vandalism, the high-priced lawyers. They weren't trying to push me out for property values. They were terrified I'd expose their whole racket. So I called Jake. His voice crackled through the phone. Excitement barely contained. Marcus, you're not just holding a zoning dispute. You've got the makings of a federal RICO case. Next call went to Dr. Bennett. She nearly jumped out of her seat when I told her, Marcus, this is 6 different environmental violations at once. I can write a report that'll bury them deeper than bedrock. And then I called Father Miguel. His reply, brother, God just handed you the stone to slay Goliath. Let's use it. We formed what I like to call my justice squad. Jake handled the legal filings. Dr. Bennett gathered irrefutable science. And Miguel rallied the farming community. Even Ethel got in on it, tipping me off whenever Preston or Delilah came snooping around the courthouse. Meanwhile, Delilah cranked her paranoia to 11. Her Facebook rants went from concerned neighbor to full-on conspiracy theory. She claimed my vineyard was a front for drug trafficking, that the IRS was about to seize my land, even that my wine contained dangerous chemicals. She was posting 20 times a day, unraveling in real time. But here's the kicker. Behind the scenes, Preston was drowning. Turns out he owed over $2 million in construction loan. Banks were breathing down his neck, demanding permits he couldn't legally provide. He was leveraged so deep, one wrong move would topple everything. So what did they do? They tried to buy me out. Preston showed up at my vineyard, briefcase in hand, sweat on his forehead. Offered me $3 million cash if I'd sell and stay quiet. I told him he couldn't pay me $10 million and throw in his firstborn. What he didn't know, I was wearing a wire. FBI agent Rodriguez, the same guy who'd inspected my property earlier, was actually building a federal case. Every bribe, every threat, every desperate lie, all recorded. The hunters had just become the hunted. And the showdown was coming faster than they realized. The Hartwells were circling the drain, and you could smell their panic from a mile away. When desperate people feel the walls closing in, they don't back down, they thrash. And Delilah, she thrashed hard. It started with vandalism. Dead fish dumped at my vineyard gate, stinking up the valley. Threatening letters slipped under my door in sloppy red ink. Sell now or regret it. Then came the false police reports. Cops knocking at 2 in the morning because some anonymous neighbor claimed I was waving guns around. Total lies. But every false call meant hours wasted, proving I wasn't some lunatic. Next came the cancellations. Couples who'd booked weddings at my vineyard got spooked by anonymous calls. That place is contaminated. Unsafe. The county's about to shut it down. 3 more weddings. Gone. Tens of thousands in lost revenue. Exactly what Delilah wanted. But here's what she didn't get. Every move she made was another nail in her coffin. My cameras caught the cars dumping trash. Phone logs traced the anonymous calls back to HOA numbers. Police reports stacked up, showing a clear pattern of harassment. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was building a bomb. Meanwhile, Jake filed an injunction that froze any new HOA actions against me. Dr. Bennett finished her environmental report, 60 pages of scientific devastation proving Preston's developments poisoned groundwater, eroded soil, and violated state and federal statutes. Miguel rallied farmers from all over the valley, folks who'd been bullied by similar tactics. Suddenly, I wasn't standing alone anymore. Even cracks formed inside the HOA. 3 board members quietly resigned, citing ethical concerns. Translation: they saw the crazy train was heading for a cliff and didn't want to be on board when it crashed. And Preston, he was unraveling fast. Construction sites abandoned mid-frame, paychecks bouncing, banks breathing down his neck. One afternoon, he showed up at my vineyard again. Eyes bloodshot, shirt untucked. This time, he offered $4 million cash 48 hours to close. Called it a settlement. I let him sweat through his pitch, then told him flat out, Preston, I wouldn't sell you this dirt if you offered $10 million and threw in your house. That's when his mask cracked. He leaned in close, whispering like a movie villain. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. Farm boy, we have resources you can't imagine." What he didn't know, the whole thing was on tape, courtesy of Agent Rodriguez, and a little wire under my jacket. Every threat, every bribe, every slip, it was all evidence. The stage was set. Jake arranged a community mediation at Town Hall, pitching it as a chance to resolve the dispute peacefully. Delilah and Preston couldn't resist, thought they'd use it to grandstand, rally support, maybe corner me in public. What they didn't know, local news cameras would be rolling. The state attorney general's office was sending observers, and the FBI was waiting in the wings with warrants ready. It wasn't a mediation. It was an ambush. And when those doors opened, the whole valley was going to watch the Hartwell's empire collapse in real time. The night before the town hall, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous, but because I was wired. 15 years of legal battles had taught me one thing: victory's sweetest when you know the other side doesn't see it coming. I sat at my kitchen table. Documents spread out like a general planning war. Surveyor maps showing HOA houses trespassing on my land. Environmental reports proving Preston poisoned the valley's soil and water. Bank records tying Delilah's HOA funds to fake contractors, classic money laundering. And, tucked in a separate folder, copies of every threatening letter, every false police report, every anonymous tip, a harassment pattern so clear it looked scripted. Barrel, my German shepherd, snoozed at my feet, while my new rescue pup Justice chewed on an old work boot. I looked at them and thought, tomorrow's the day we end this circus. The morning of the mediation, Solstice Valley's town hall was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway. Standing room only. Neighbors shoulder to shoulder. Some came for the drama. Some came out of loyalty. And plenty just wanted to see Delilah finally get hers. Delilah arrived first, strutting like she owned the building. Perfectly coiffed hair, bright power suit, smile plastered on like she was campaigning for mayor. She carried a briefcase stuffed with evidence, probably the same fake petitions and slanted photos she'd been peddling online. Behind her, Preston lumbered in with 2 lawyers, whose shoes alone probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with cheap municipal coffee. Channel 7 News had cameras in the back. Red lights blinking. Reporters scribbling notes. Even Judge Wells, retired but respected, had agreed to mediate. She tapped the microphone, and the room hushed. Delilah went first. Of course. She launched into her speech, hitting all her favorite talking points: property values, neighborhood safety, community standards. She waved her petition in the air like it was the Constitution, her voice trembling with fake righteousness. We cannot allow one selfish individual to destroy the harmony we've built here. Preston followed, all calm businessman charm. He framed himself as the reasonable negotiator, offering to buy my vineyard for fair market value. His lawyers nodded like bobbleheads, painting him as the hero trying to save the neighborhood from a rogue farmer. And then it was my turn. I stood up slow, let the silence stretch, then pulled out my own folder, thicker than both of theirs combined. Ladies and gentlemen, I began. Thank you for coming. Tonight's not just about fences or grapes. It's about truth. I laid it all out. The 1962 deed with perpetual farming rights. The 1987 heritage designation that Preston ignored. Surveyor maps proving HOA houses sat illegally on my land. Environmental reports showing contamination. Bank records tying HOA funds to shell companies. And then, the pièce de résistance. FBI evidence of wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering. Murmurs rippled through the room. Heads turned. Cameras zoomed in. Delilah's smile froze, then cracked like cheap plaster. Preston went pale as chalk. I paused, then dropped the final bomb. And as of this evening, the State Attorney General and the FBI have opened investigations into these matters. In fact, I nodded toward the doors. Right on cue, Agent Rodriguez walked in, flanked by 2 federal marshals, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Delilah shot to her feet, pointing at me, shrieking, "This is a setup, he's lying, Marcus is the criminal here," her voice cracked, hysteria leaking through. But nobody believed her. Not with Preston being cuffed right there under the bright lights. Cameras flashing like it was Hollywood. His lawyers stammered about due process. But their client was already being led out the door. Delilah's sobs echoed through the hall. Her power suit wrinkled. Mascara running like black rivers. Neighbors who once kissed the ring now looked at her like she was toxic waste. And me, I just stood there, calm as a glass of my finest wine, and said the line I'd been waiting months to deliver. "Mrs. Hartwell, remember those police you sent to my vineyard tonight? They came for you." The fallout was instant, like a grenade had gone off in the middle of Solstice Valley. The very next morning, the news cycle chewed Preston and Delilah to pieces. Channel 7 ran the footage on repeat, Preston in handcuffs, Delilah screaming like a banshee while federal marshals held her back. Headlines screamed Valley developer, arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud, and HOA president at center of federal probe. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now knocked on my door with casseroles and apologies. "We had no idea," they whispered, like they were confessing sins. Even Bill from the hardware store, Mr. Ice-Cold Shoulder, came by with a case of nails and a sheepish grin. But the real hammer dropped 6 months later in federal court. I sat in the gallery, arms crossed, watching Preston Hartwell stand before the judge. His suit hung loose on him, like the weight of his empire had finally slipped off. The judge didn't mince words. "Your scheme represents systematic exploitation of agricultural families and a blatant disregard for environmental law. This court will not tolerate it." 3 years in federal prison. That was the sentence. And you could see the fight drain out of Preston like air from a punctured tire. Delilah didn't get off easy either. She took a plea deal, 6 months in minimum security, plus probation. She lost her house, her white Escalade, her reputation. Last I heard, she was selling insurance 3 counties over, keeping her head lower than a snake's belly. Funny how quick Queen of the HOA turned into just another name people spat out like bad wine. But here's the thing. The biggest victory wasn't watching them fall. It was what rose up in their place. Solstice Valley was officially declared a protected agricultural heritage district. Stronger protections than Fort Knox. No more McMansions sprouting like weeds. No more HOA bullies masquerading as neighborhood saviors. Just farms, families, and community. With settlement money, I started the Solstice Valley Heritage Foundation. We fund scholarships for ag students. Run school tours so kids learn food doesn't just appear at Walmart. And keep community gardens thriving. Every harvest festival now draws thousands. Kids laughing. Neighbors grilling barbecue. Folks sipping wine that tastes of freedom and soil. My vineyard, Justice Valley Wine, took off like wildfire. Wedding bookings stacked up 2 years in advance. Journalists wrote glowing pieces about the farmer who beat the HOA. And me, I became the poster child for standing your ground against suburban greed. On a personal note, life healed in ways I never expected. Dr. Sarah Bennett, the soil scientist who helped expose Preston, became more than just a colleague. She moved into the farmhouse, bringing her microscope and her laughter. Turns out, love grows best in soil watered with justice. Barrel, my shepherd. Got a buddy too, another rescue we named Justice. Those two patrol the vineyard like furry FBI agents, always on alert for any hint of HOA nonsense. And every Friday night, the barn fills with farmers. We call it the Valley Farmers Alliance, part legal clinic, part potluck. We share resources, swap stories, and make damn sure no developer ever steamrolls another family again. Even Father Miguel drops by, preaching sermons about the land flowing with milk, honey, and accountability. Funny enough, Ethel, the courthouse clerk who found that misfiled folder, became a local celebrity. She's writing a book called Filing Cabinets and Felons. Folks say Hollywood's already sniffing around for rights. Sometimes, I stand at the edge of the vineyard at sunset. Sarah by my side. Dogs chasing fireflies in the rows. I think back to that first morning, sirens blaring. Delilah smirking. Cops stomping through my vines. And I can't help but smile. Because in the end, the bullies lost, and the vineyard, our land, our heritage won. 6 months after the dust settled, life in Solstice Valley felt different, lighter, like the whole valley could finally breathe without Delilah's perfume choking the air. The McMansions, Preston built, condemned and torn down. Bulldozers rolled through, flattening those cookie-cutter palaces of greed into rubble. The lands being restored, native grasses, wildlife corridors, clean water running where septic leaks once poisoned the soil. Watching those houses crumble under the weight of justice, it was like therapy for the soul. The HOA gone, dissolved like sugar in hot coffee. Neighbors realized they'd been paying dues to a fraud machine. And once the queen bee was dethroned, the hive scattered. Nobody mourned it. Nobody wanted it back. Good riddance. Meanwhile, my vineyard thrived. Justice Valley Wine became more than just a label. It became a symbol. Orders poured in from across the country. Folks wanted a bottle of the wine that beat the HOA. Weddings booked out years in advance. And every tour I gave turned into a lesson on standing your ground. But what mattered most wasn't profit. It was community. Every week, the Valley Farmers Alliance met in my barn hay bales. Strong coffee, and the smell of determination hanging in the air. Farmers trading advice, pooling resources, standing shoulder to shoulder against the next land grabber foolish enough to try us. And we didn't just stay local. Word spread. Calls started coming in from Oregon, Texas, Vermont. Farmers who'd heard my story, who realized they had rights, too, who finally believed they weren't powerless against HOA bullies and greedy developers. What started as one vineyard's fight was becoming a movement. On a personal note, turns out justice makes a good fertilizer for love. Sarah and I built something together. Rooted deep. Stronger than oak. She still runs soil tests. But now she does it with a glass of wine in her hand, and a smile that feels like home. Beryl and Justice, my two furry security guards, chase birds in the vines every morning. Tails wagging like banners of victory. And me, I finally sleep easy. No more sirens in the dawn. No more threats in the mailbox. Just the sound of wind through grape leaves. And the knowledge that when bullies came for me, I didn't bow, I fought back. So let me ask you, what would you do if your HOA tried to fine you, arrest you, or even steal your land? Would you roll over, or would you dig in, like I did, and remind them some of us can't be bullied? Drop your HOA horror stories in the comments. Share where you're watching from. Let's turn these tales into lessons, so the next family knows they don't have to surrender to suburban tyrants. Because here's the truth. The Karens of the world don't want you to know when good people fight back with facts, with law, with community HOAs, and greedy developers always lose. And that victory, it tastes sweeter than the finest wine ever bottled.